going to go over some basic information regarding nutrition. Some of this might be review, hopefully maybe something a little bit new. We don't want it to be too stale. We all know about food pyramid stuff. Just some basic objectives. We're going to first discuss what exactly is healthy eating for a student with diabetes, what that looks like. We're going to go over carb counting. We are going to get kind of more into the specifics and the nitty-gritty of carb counting, giving you guys lots of really great resources for more accurate carb counting, and also going over the ways that nutrients can affect blood sugar differently. There's different impact based on the combinations of food. So, overarching concept. Healthy eating for a child living with diabetes is basically the same as healthy eating for a child who does not live with diabetes. I'm sure that's not super shocking to anybody. Of course, we want to normalize this for our students as much as possible. So you can't have that and know that food isn't for you are not really things that we say or promote, thankfully. Nutrition needs are going to change over the span of a child's time at school. Those needs change based on their physical activity, their growth and development, age, all those things. So that's why their plans need to be much more individualized. We always have to take in consideration someone's ethnic or cultural background, of course, socioeconomic background as well, and some additional dietary restrictions. A lot of children, you may notice that you guys take care of living with diabetes may also have celiac. There's increased risk for the development of celiac for those living with type 1 diabetes. So that's something else we have to consider. Healthy eating patterns, type 1 and type 2, they're going to be important across the board. We want to make sure that all these kiddos have physical activity programs and are overall eating healthy, balanced diets. So a couple other things we want to acknowledge. When we're teaching families, we always acknowledge that there's kind of a stage of change that they are in, what they're capable of doing at that time. So focusing on small changes, those small consistent changes or baby steps over time can lead to big changes overall in their health. And verbiage matters. So we always have positive language that we use when we're talking about food and healthy eating. It's not about elimination or restriction or foods being good versus bad. Maybe it's all the time for food versus sometimes foods, just to give an example. All right, the philosophical question of the day: what is healthy eating? Well, according to the American Diabetes Association, I'm just going to kind of paraphrase this. Healthy eating emphasizes key nutrition principles, so that's really going to be focusing on whole foods, more whole foods, fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, nuts, lean proteins, lower fat dairy, and then minimizing the ultra-processed, more refined sugar foods. And that's for individuals living with diabetes, but I think that's kind of a universal concept. Again, just kind of going back to the fact that nutrition and healthy eating for kids living with diabetes is going to be the same for all of our kids. Balance is really the key. So let's just kind of break that down. I know you guys have all heard the concept of eating the rainbow, which I like. I'm very visual, so we always want to focus on lots of fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables first, whether that's fresh fruits and vegetables, canned, frozen. We don't discriminate there. We just want a lot more color on our kids' plates. They're going to get tons of micronutrients from this. They're going to get fiber as well, which we're going to be talking about more today. And that's starchy vegetables and non-starchy vegetables. Kids tend to like starchy vegetables maybe a little bit more. Our corn or potatoes, But we also want to encourage them to incorporate all those non-starchy vegetables. And then of course fruit, whole, frozen. Next up we've got our proteins. We are also promoting leaner proteins. We want less saturated fat overall in our kids' diets. And this is also going to incorporate plant-based proteins as well, so some soy-based protein, and also the low mercury fish. Grains are a really important part of our kiddos' diets. Living with diabetes doesn't mean that you are minimizing or eliminating your bread. We do want more of our grains to be whole grains. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And then the lower fat dairy. As far as beverages go, obviously, water is clean. We want lots and lots of water in our kids. We live in a very hot climate, so for that reason alone, we want lots of water in our kids, but also incorporating minimal amounts of fruit juices, and then just to kind of break up the monotony, sugar-free beverages as well. Sugar substitutes, there's a lot of controversy, unfortunately, regarding sugar substitutes, lots of misinformation, but they're completely safe in moderation. We have a lot of evidence to back that in our scientific journals. So one thing that I always mention is really focusing on like the caffeine content of some of these beverages. We don't want our kiddos getting all of their hydration from Coke Zero, or even the decaffeinated or uncaffeinated beverages, but we want them to have some options. We can't take things away and then not give them something to replace it. So sugary beverages, although we do use them as treatment, a lot of sugary beverages in a diet of someone living with diabetes can really impact their blood sugar stability, so that's something that we do try to minimize. We never take any food away, but we do try to work on at least minimizing those sugary beverages. Sugar alcohols, I don't really have a lot of great things to say about sugar alcohols. If any of you guys had sugar-free frozen yogurt in your life, you've probably consumed a large quantity of sugar alcohols at one point, and they can cause a lot of GI distress, so tummy troubles, cramping, diarrhea. So the foods that are sugar-free tend to be really high in sugar alcohols, and those aren't really things that we promote much for our kids because they just make us feel kind of yucky. So again, I'm really visual. I love the myplate.gov just visual approach. How do we teach kids the best way to plan out their plates? And again, we're just focusing on the things I just mentioned, fruits and vegetables first, and then of course we want to balance that out with our lean proteins, our grains, hopefully whole grains as much as possible, and then our dairy. We're going to talk a little bit about how fiber affects blood sugar, but again, with so many processed packaged foods, just kind of as part of the reality of our kids' day-to-day lives, having some of their carbohydrate or their grain forms of carbohydrate being in the form of whole grains is going to help. Again, iron, micronutrients, and fiber, which does help to stabilize blood sugars. We do have some resources here. This is just the Tucson kind of local area resources, Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona, Borderlands. So these might be resources that if you're aware of any families that are maybe struggling to get healthy foods in the house, this is something that you can share with them. Really great resources there. All right, I'm going to step aside and let Shannon take over.
So we're going to get into carbohydrates because you're dosing insulin for carbohydrates when your kiddos are at school and you're helping them manage. There's a later slide we'll look at kind of the effects of carbs, protein, and fat on blood sugars, and what you'll see is that carbs have the biggest effect on blood sugars, and they match very nicely with the way insulin action is, your rapid acting insulins. So it's easy to use kind of carb counting as a strategy for insulin dosing. Kiddos in general need about half of their energy from carbs, about a third of it from fats. Of course, fats serve other roles in their body. And then about a quarter of their needs come from protein. So we're really looking at kind of having them not be fearful of carbohydrates, including them, positive messaging about carbs. As soon as they hear, since I cover the weekends and I work with a lot of families who are new to a lot of information, as soon as you say, when they eat carbs, we're gonna dose insulin, it's like an automatic, so if I don't eat carbs, I don't have to take insulin. And it's like, I know why you went there, but we're gonna shift that focus and bring it back to how important they are for these growing kiddos. They're not little adults. That's probably the biggest message as I was learning, is that kids are not little adults. So we're trying to make this doable for them, and I always tell my families, you kind of take over for what their pancreas can't do. So look at it as that, you're giving them insulin for the food that they're eating, and that their pancreas, if it wanted to, and it could, it would, but it can't, so you're helping them out. So our main sources of carbs are probably very familiar. Fruits, grains, milk and yogurt, dessert foods, lots of what kiddos snack on, chips, Takis, all of those things. Vegetables, it varies. You have your starchy vegetables, like Jackie was telling you, your potatoes, your corn, your peas. So they're gonna have your higher carb counts, your beans, your lentils. Nuts is kind of like depends on how much you have. We went to the grocery store yesterday and they had these like tahini pistachios. I was like, oh, that's such a great combination. So I flipped over the label and the carbs were 9 grams per the serving size. And I was like, noted, because nuts are generally thought of as like low sources, but it really depends on how much you have or if they're coated with honey and things like that. So you just want to be aware. Condiments are kind of the sneaky ones that get in. Ketchup, barbecue sauce, sweeter dressings, and of course like your honey, jams, and jellies. And then your sugary drinks. Your lower carb or carb-free sources are your protein foods, unless of course they would have a breading, cheese, oils that you cook with, butter, margarine, mayonnaise, and eggs. Just a note about carbs and gluten-free diets. We kind of talked about earlier, if you have one autoimmune disease, you're at risk for others. So a lot of our kids are kind of facing that, okay, I have type 1 diabetes and now I also have celiac, and how am I going to manage all of this together? And so they're following a gluten-free diet. If you have kids that have celiac disease, I would make sure that parents provide the snacks that they want them to have, really for all the kids, but especially celiac, because you want to know that it's gluten-free, without having to think too hard about it. What do you want your kiddos to have for snacks? Okay, we'll keep that here for them. So they're following the gluten-free diet, so they're avoiding wheat, barley, and rye. So we have to watch out for those things. Okay, just a quick question. Which of the following are considered forbidden foods for people living with diabetes? Ramen, soda, diet soda, Takis, or there are none? There are none, right. Always positive food messaging. We can fit this in. If you love it, we're gonna fit it in. So for carbohydrate counting, what you will see on your school orders, your DMMP, is the carbohydrate ratio. So 1 unit of whether they take a Humalog, a Novolog, is matched for every so many grams of carbohydrates. So for our littles, they might have 1 unit for every 50 grams. For our older kiddos, they might have a unit for every 5 grams. It varies a lot based off of their age, their insulin requirements, how sensitive they are to insulin. And sometimes you have different ratios depending upon the time of the day. So it's important to note that that's easy to manage with an insulin pump, but to be aware of it if somebody has changing ratios during the day and they're on injections. Very rarely, maybe we have a family who really struggles with math, but we know that they will include carbs with all of their meals and snacks. We'll have them on a set dosing plan, which means like X amount of units per meal and usually half of that per snack. Not very common, but once in a while we just have families who need that simplicity, and just to be aware, if they're not gonna eat carbs for that meal or snack, don't give them insulin. Always keep that in the back of your mind. All diabetes management requires some knowledge of carbohydrates. We're going to talk about the Beta Bionics pump today called the iLet, where you're not necessarily carbohydrate counting, but you do have to have an awareness of, the carb portions or carb foods in the meal or snack. So there's really not a plan right now where you have to have at least some knowledge of carbs. And all the different devices or injections, there's always that underlying foundation of what are carbs, where can I find them, what foods don't have carbs. What to do when you're carbohydrate counting. Always use the nutrition facts label if you have one. That will give you your most accurate information, and always be aware of the serving size. And is my kiddo eating half? Are they eating double? I encourage people to keep it simple, like not make weird fractions out of stuff. It's just too complicated. I always say goldfish, because it's like 55 pieces for goldfish, and don't eat like 10 and a half. That's just too complicated math, keep it simple. Half, do you want half? Do you want double? Do you want the portion? When you don't have a nutrition facts label, you can use a trusted resource. So Calorie King has a great app. It's full of ads, but it's still a very reliable app, and it's free. There's a partner book with it. And then, if all else fails, you can always use a type of estimation. We have some links to some quick guides for half a cup of fruit, 15 grams, glass of milk, 12 grams, like piece of bread, 15 grams, just little quick references like that are safe. It's not the most accurate, but it's still safe. So that's what we have to keep in mind. The bottom point, carb counting varies from person to person. If you put Jackie and I next to each other as dietitians, we're gonna carb count a little differently. Probably be a few grams off of each other, and that is totally safe. So I don't want you to ever feel like, if I didn't count this exactly as is, I created an emergency situation. It shouldn't be like that. I have a high schooler, and we talk about portion sizes a lot, and he's a foodie, he loves food. So he loves those like Snyder's of Hanover honey mustard pretzels, if you guys know those. So we're standing in the kitchen and he's eating them, and he's like even though if you're not in front of the TV, if you're having a conversation, he's just enjoying his food talking. And I call him Lovey, I'm like, Lovey, what's the portion size on that? And he's like, Mom, do you think I'm gonna count 14 pieces of variable shapes and sizes? And it's like, okay, like I know where you're at. If you needed to carb count, I know where you're at with that. We're gonna be more of an estimator. So I think it's just acknowledging where people are at. Some people like to count the carbs of everything, and that's not wrong. Some people need to estimate, and that's not necessarily wrong either. It's just what they're capable of doing at the time, and that's okay. If you have somebody who stops taking insulin for their meals, but then they all of a sudden start kind of like winging it or eyeballing it, I'm gonna acknowledge that as progression. Right? We're doing something now, so this is a great step. When you're looking at food labels, look for the total carbohydrate for the portion size. That will encompass like the fibers, sugars, and starches that are in the food. An older method is like subtracting fiber from carb counts. The ADA really doesn't promote that anymore. It's more often than not necessary, so we don't feel like we need to get into the minutia of that. As long as you're looking at the serving size and the total carbs, that's going to help you determine the insulin dose. There are different apps and resources that we would consider, good sources of information. MyFitnessPal, if it has that little green check, it's a verified entry. So look for those if you're using an app like that. The Figly app is really great for people who are totally visual learners. It's food on a plate and that's how you eat. So that can help them. Again, it's not exact carb counting, but it's like an estimation. I can at least kind of pull a number together from this. And then OneDrop. I like the apps that have the barcode scanners, especially as you're building recipes. Those are super helpful. And there are links to kind of, if you need a quick guide and you need to put that in your health office of just like, this kiddo has all these things in their lunchbox and they forgot to send a note with the pre-carb counts, well then I at least have a quick guide to kind of reference for a lot of common foods they would bring. I see everyone taking pictures, so I just want to give you time. Okay. Another reflection question. A student brings their lunch from home and some items are not labeled. How is it best to handle this? The eyeball method. Using a trusted carb counting resource, an app, a book, or the quick guide. I'm gonna skip this and forget it. Or be like, you know what, would you rather have some meat and cheese instead? The no carb items? What do you think is the best option? Right. It's not meant to be hard. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Jackie to talk more about insulin timing.
All right, insulin timing. So ideally, we want insulin to be dosed prior to a child's meal. Of course, when we're working with young ones, they're not the most predictable eaters. They're often more fussy. They might claim that they're going to eat everything and then they eat nothing. So it's, in a perfect world, we're always dosing before. In the event that and this would be in the school orders as well, but in the event that you are dosing after, you're always going to get the blood sugar before the meal. So whether that's using their sensor or a finger poke, that's what you're going to use to correct within that 30-minute period from starting the meal. So they have like 30 minutes to eat, and then you would correct and dose based on what they ate and what their blood sugar was prior to that meal. Late dosing can result in low blood sugars. That's even the case with our automated pump systems, so something to keep in mind. And if you're ever concerned about that 2-hour post-meal check can just be something that helps with making you feel a little bit more confident that the kiddos are doing okay afterwards. All right, so let's talk about a mealtime scenario. We have Junie B. Jones. Junie B. was with us last year, and she's back because we love her so much. She's a big little spear fingers. So she brought her lunch from home. She has a cutie, it's kind of a standard lunch, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. She did get a frosted cupcake from one of her friends, and of course, the Takis. You can tell we all like Takis. So we ask, okay, Junie, are you gonna eat all of this food? Yes, she's absolutely gonna eat it all. She's super jazzed to eat it all. So we're gonna look at the school orders. This is essentially what they're going to look like from our office. So you see here that she's taking Humalog, and her insulin to carb ratio is 1 unit for 35 grams of carbohydrate. So we're gonna count everything up. We're assuming that Junie brought a lunch that the parent or guardian did not count carbs for, and even if some of it was counted, we would still have to figure out what that cupcake was, because she got that at school. So we have one cutie at 11 grams. The peanut butter sandwich, we're gonna count the bread and the jelly, and the cupcake is gonna be 30. The Takis, we'll look at the nutrition label, so that's 16. So these are items that you could use any of the resources that Shannon mentioned. We could use multiple resources here. We can use just a generalized guideline for the bread and the jelly. We can look up in the Calorie King app what a frosted cupcake, a standard frosted cupcake would be, and then again the nutrition label to look at the bag of Takis. So we have a total of 102 grams of carb. We're going to divide that by her 35 gram carb ratio, and I didn't major in math, but if anybody wants to do a little quick calculation, we come to, drum roll,
2.9.
2.9. Yes, I was prepared. I didn't know that C was the answer. So 2.9. So this is the number that we're going to utilize for her carbs. Of course, we would still wait to see what her correction is before we did any rounding. But of course, we know Junie, and we know that Junie did not, in fact, eat all of her food. She did not eat half of her sandwich, and she didn't eat that half bag of chips. She was very interested in the cupcake. So now we're at a deficit of 30 grams. So we've already dosed for the full 102 grams, and now we need to make up that 30 grams. So there are some options. I always like to suggest first trying to use food to cover for food. So we don't just want to immediately go to juice. If we can utilize some other food options that might be around in her snack box, that would be best. So we have an example of some graham crackers, even milk, which is going to be more of a mix of carb and protein. And then of course, in a pinch, we've got juice. We have to cover for the insulin that we just gave her. So 8 ounces of juice would be roughly that 30 grams of carb. And then again, what can we do? Because this is a little bit different than every other day, maybe not for Junie, but just in general, we can always do that 2-hour check to make sure that she's still stable. All right, we have another scenario that Shannon's gonna share.
Okay, we have Dogman. It's book fair week here, my kids. It's that time. So Dogman in 5th grade is buying school lunch today. So we nicely have all of the information there. People might ask, are you going to count that 1 gram in the Italian dressing? If the information is there and you want to use it, you're not wrong. If I needed to do estimation, I probably wouldn't include that 1 gram, but just trying to appeal to the situation and knowing some parents, like all those numbers, some parents are okay not including the 2 very tiny ones. So we get to a total of 87 grams after we add all of those up. In his particular school order, I think this is one of those kiddos who has a set dosing. Okay, I see he needs 4 units with each meal. So that means we're gonna need carbs involved, right? If he's gonna get that set dose, I need to make sure that he is going to eat those carbs. There was a bottom comment on the slide. I'll go back to that. If you have a kid that doesn't eat lunch, I feel like this is middle schoolers. They like skip lunch and then eat a whole bunch when they get home. That was my kid. No matter how much you're willing to pack or, offer, they're just gonna eat when they get home. If they do that, still evaluate their blood sugar at the lunchtime so that you can see how, like it's a check-in. How are things going? Are you running high? Are you borderline gonna run low? We still need to do a check-in at lunchtime, even if you're not going to eat. So in this particular scenario, our person on set dosing, he changed his mind and he's like, you know what? Instead, I brought this beef and cheese stick and a sparkling ice. So you're like, okay, your flag goes off. These are low carb foods. So what are we gonna do? in our situation? A, B, C, or D? C, yeah. Yep, there's a little bit of counseling involved to make sure he knows what can happen if you take insulin without eating carbs, and would you be willing to maybe include some of those carb foods so we can safely give you that insulin? Here's our slide on kind of how foods affect the blood sugar. So you see that big peak with carbohydrates, less of a peak with protein, and then fat, there's not much of a peak and it kind of extends out a little longer. So the basic kind of thing to keep in mind is that when kids have meals with mixed nutrients, not just carbs, they tend to see a more balanced effect on their blood sugar. And that's what we want to try to counsel them. If you go back to that plate method, having different foods from all of those food groups in a meal, you're going to see a more balanced effect on the blood sugar. Meals that have higher fiber and fat tend to take a little longer to break down, and fiber is not completely digested. So just to take note of, foods have different effects on the blood sugar. And then people have done kind of trial and error. They might use different strategies in order to handle that meal. They might use kind of divided dosing. If you have a pump, this is a lot easier. To give a little bit up front and then the rest over a few hours. That's a feature, but I would never do that unless it was clear when to do that and how to do that. That's not something I would just do without a discussion. Generally, you're just gonna be entering the carbs and giving the bolus if you have a pump, or doing that with injections. But some people use that other strategy for heavier foods. Think of pizza. That's a common one where people might do that. We talked about fiber, how subtracting that's not really like a current method. And if somebody were to eat a lot of sugar alcohols, those are also not completely digested. So some people might use the strategy of subtracting half the sugar alcohol content from the total grams. Not a lot of our kids are doing this. They don't eat foods with a lot of, if you like OD on sugar-free candy, you only do it once, right? So they're not, this is not a behavior that they're doing. But just to keep in mind, you might hear people say that. Okay, so what is our role as nutrition educators? And I say that for the whole room, because you're with these kids, you make such a great positive impact on them, and you see them every day. We're seeing them every 3 months, sometimes a little more often in between, but you have those daily touch points with them that are so important. So what do you think is the best choice here? D. Yep. Talking about behavior change. In our office, we have these pictures of fruits and vegetables, and it's kind of fun because the kids will just unprompted stand in front of them and look at all the different colors, and then you talk about incorporating fruits and veggies, and you say, okay, is there something that you want to set as a goal? And they'll be like, mushrooms, I want to try mushrooms. So if you have those visuals, they really navigate towards that, and it kind of helps them want to try new things. And those are our references. Questions, concerns?
When you guys see them and like talk about nutrition specifically, is that what you like do come up with goals for them? So that would be something that is so beneficial, like somehow for us to know, like not like an order, but just like, hey, we're working on trying this food or adding this thing.
Oh, I see.
Because like you said, we see them so often, and I think that's where we tend to struggle the most. Is, you know, we'll see a choice that's not our best choice in the world. But you know, not wanting to take that away or have that negative impact, but have that like, hey, have you tried your whatever the goal is food today? Right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how we can figure that out, but I feel like it would be such a like impactful
Just reinforcement.
thing. Yeah, like sort of closing that loop. So,
I like that idea.
I don't know how.
We don't get that communication from parents of
Very rarely.
like, it's like, oh, we saw the doctor, we changed the carb count, that's it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like, it's not like, we're working towards this.
It could be a conversation that we have with the parents to normalize them communicating.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There tends to be that disconnect, and we knew what you guys had talked about was a goal. We'll try to ask the kid, and it'll Sometimes they'll tell us, yeah, they said
I like that idea a lot, just having more people kind of cheerlead the same thing. Yeah, we can definitely mention that in our visits. We have like 9 or 10 different topics, and it's kind of like, what's the biggest red flag, and we kind of go from there. We're gonna get into school orders as our next section, and we do have an area to type in at the bottom, kind of like specialized considerations. I don't know if maybe, I'm gonna see if we can remember, it might take us a few times, to like add in there, like the student is working on this goal, if it's something that you, can have an impact with, you know, things like that.
We might be able to use school's address and just stick it in there, like you say,
Yeah.
they have to summarize it to give to the parents, so
Oh,
the
yeah.
school is aware, hey, Sammy is working on finding 2 new vegetables before he comes back in June.
Yeah. That's a good idea. We have like 1 or 2 goals usually that are always kind of like reassessing, but we could definitely, yeah, include that. That's a great idea.
Another idea I'm thinking of is like maybe before your scheduled meetings, I don't know if there's a way to actually reach out to us, if there's a form that the parents bring us, and like what are some goals that we would like to see at school, like how to communicate that to you guys of like, need a very, you know, few foods or things like that's our concern, you know, how would we communicate that to you guys routinely, like we don't know when their visits necessarily are with you
Yeah.
guys. Okay.
I like those ideas though, like just it's, everyone's on the same team, we're on the same page, those are great ideas. Did I miss anyone?
Back here, had a question?
I was just gonna kind of, I guess we have multiple students that we dose after they eat. So, and it's, I mean, you know, nonverbal, goes to hot lunch, what do you, hot lunch, that's ages. But, and then the monitor, the TA will tell us what the student eats, and then we dose accordingly. And it's a pen, so he's not on a pump. But I mean, I just feel like I have multiple students that they are very picky eaters, and they never eat any, you know, barely anything, or, you know, so what is that pro and con of dosing after versus dosing before? We always check the blood sugar before, you know, we
Sure.
know that, but it's, you know, we dose for the blood sugar and then the carbs all after the meal.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, again, very, very individualized. When we have young kiddos diagnosed, you know, as babies, toddlers, coming into preschool, and they're at that point getting dosed after, the goal is to get to a place in which they're being dosed before, as soon as possible. But when we have children who have developmental delay and these kind of compounding concerns, it may be never a realistic goal, and that's also okay.
So the probably issue with dosing late is that you catch the blood sugar late. It's already on the rise because the food is being broken down before that insulin action sets in. So that would be maybe the biggest consequence, is that they have a higher blood sugar. Even sometimes if it's a matter of, and again, this is something easier with pumps, but giving half of the carb dose up front, if you're like, I know you're gonna eat those 2 food items because you do it every day. And this is another like parent discussion, like let's be all on the same page, make sure everyone's comfortable. Can I at least dose you for 10 or 15 up front, and then we'll see if you eat the other 20 to 30 or whatever is a part of their meal, but at least you have some of that insulin working there at the beginning.
But your slide said that late bolusing may cause hypoglycemia. So can you explain that more? Cause you just said if the insulin, your blood sugar's already on the rise, so, but you're dosing for the blood sugar prior to eating, how does that lead to hypo?
That's a good question. With our newer H pumps that are automated, so they're seeing the CGM values and they're like, I'm gonna ramp up or ramp down. If you bolus late, it's already ramping up. It says, I see your blood sugar's going up. There's not that insulin there on board to cover that. So I'm gonna start trying to cover you, and then all of a sudden it's like, here are my carbs, and then it's like, hold the brakes, you know, because we're already on that rise, I give you extra, and then all of a sudden all these carbs and insulin for those carbs come in. So you just kind of, more for those pump settings that are automated delivery, when we bolus late, it's already tried to help you out, and then you come in late with carbs and it's just too much. So that's where sometimes doing a little bit up front, like 10 to 15 grams, can kind of help with that. So you know that kid's gonna eat that, but you're not confident they're gonna finish that, and then that will help on all ends.
All of my students are pens. Like, that's the other thing I guess I should have clarified, is that when they're on pens, you're not trying to say, give them a little insulin, like poke them twice.
Poke 'em twice, yeah, and that could be, you know, if you finish in under 30 minutes, great, I'll dose you whenever you finish. If you don't, what I'm gonna see is a higher blood sugar, and I'll just kinda catch it late. But that doesn't kinda pose the same risk, because there's not something in the background already ramping up.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a little, like, those kind of pumps are more protective, but for this situation, you know, you don't have to worry about that with the injections.
So if they're on a pump and they're starting to eat and you're gonna give them the bolus after they eat, is it safe to just pause the pump for them to keep giving the insulin for that number increasing, and then you continue the number before they started eating with the carbs that they're eating?
We're gonna be talking about pumping, and like, we're gonna be talking a little bit more about the pumps
Okay.
and the functionality of the pumps in another one of the talks, so we'll definitely get to that question.
Anything else? We're gonna cut into your break, I'm sorry. We can, what do you think? 5 minutes? Okay, yeah, if you wanna get up, go to the bathroom, we'll start at like 10:05. Thanks, guys.
So I'm confused, I should have asked them on each side. What's the difference between, they said, like, sugar, something, those aren't sugar alcohols, is it different?
No, it's like mannitol, xylitol.
Okay.
So it's like the ones that have the tall.
Okay, so those are sugar alcohols.
And those are not all processed. So I like half.
So it will increase your, because I think my blood running is now sugar-free dominant. Do it because it's supposed to be bad, right?
Well, no, it's like they said that, like, you still get insulin, but what they were saying is for some people, I feel like this is like very good. Because they make half the carbs.
Okay.
Like they half the carb amount for sugar alcohol.
Okay.
So if it's 15, there's 7.
Okay, that makes sense. And all my knowledge is all the diets I've ever been on. I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. All the diets and dieting.